Political leaders of the West all say, we will support Ukraine for as long as it takes. But do we really want this war to continue? There's not a single soul in Ukraine who wants Russia to keep on terrorizing the Ukrainian people. And in the allied countries, we just want to see Russia lose, so the political focus can return to improving the world instead of us all watching Putin destroy it. The war has already proven Russia cannot defeat Ukraine militarily. So, obviously, Russia would lose this war rather quickly if the 54 countries now allied with Ukraine did not support Ukraine reluctantly for as long as it takes, but urgently supported Ukraine with everything it takes to secure a Ukrainian victory. So, why don't we? Let's take a closer look. We begin this episode with a remarkable statement from retired US Army General James A. Marks. He appeared on CNN in September last year. At that time, Russian politician Dmitri Medvedev claimed NATO wouldn't react if Russia used nuclear weapons in Ukraine. So CNN anchor Erin Burnett asked General Marks about this.
I would guarantee if that took place, sends a very powerful message. There would be a U.S.-led coalition inserted into this fight. They wouldn't cross over into Russia, and they would defeat this Russian military in Ukraine in a short amount of time, probably 96 hours. Putin understands that.
96 hours. This is a well-educated military expert who worked 30 years in the US Army, and his estimate is if NATO really wanted this war to end, it would be over in 4 days. So why is this war raging on then? To gain some insight, let us look at the motives of the stakeholders in this war, and the end goal they're aiming for, to figure out who could want this war to continue. Ukraine has been invaded by Russia, and on Russian state TV, they talk about genocide of the Ukrainian people as if it was a casual hobby. This gives Ukrainians the most transparent motive of all. They're fighting for their own survival. In the beginning of the war, Ukraine was actually negotiating ceasefire initiatives with Russia. But in early March 2022, Ukrainian presidential advisor Mikhailo Podolyak said the negotiations went nowhere. And it certainly didn't help that Russia kept on bombing Ukraine while negotiators were sitting at the table. Neither did it build any trust that 3 negotiators experienced symptoms of poisoning. After many months of war and countless war crimes committed by Russia, the Ukrainian government has no confidence in a political solution to the conflict. This was expressed clearly by President Zelenskyy when he spoke at the United Nations in September.
Evil cannot be trusted. Ask Prigozhin if one bets on Putin's promises.
Zelenskyy certainly has a point. Asking Prigozhin would be kind of difficult, as he was killed in a plane explosion right after takeoff from Moscow, where he had previously struck a deal with Vladimir Putin. And then, like so many other Putin adversaries before him, he was killed. With no realistic diplomatic solution ahead of us, Zelenskyy's position is clear. He wants the weapons needed to defeat Russia and liberate all regions of Ukraine. As we will look at more stakeholders in this war, I will place Zelenskyy up here, aiming for a Ukrainian victory as soon as possible. The other combatant is Russian dictator Vladimir Putin, the man who called this war his special military operation. That actually reveals a great deal about his thinking at the beginning of the war. Putin planned a blitzkrieg which would topple the government in Kiev in a matter of days. So initially, this places him up here, aiming for a swift Russian victory. But Putin's plan failed miserably. The war is now in its second year, and the Russian war machine has lost a staggering number of soldiers and equipment. Instead of Putin expanding the Russian Empire into Europe's second largest country, he has now reduced Russia to a pariah state, a kind of North Russia, headed by a dictator who can no longer travel because he is now wanted by the International Criminal Court for war crimes. In Russia, over 1,000 international companies have either put their activities on hold or completely left the country. And the sanctions, introduced by the EU and the G7 countries, have had a devastating effect on the Russian economy. Putin has played a high-stakes poker game and pushed the entire future of Russia into the pot. With stakes that high, to him the war in Ukraine is a game he cannot afford to lose. And therein lies the rub. Being unable to win in the short term, Putin's only option is playing the long game. Prolonging the war opens the possibility Joe Biden might lose the US presidential election next year, bringing back the wonderful days of America First, where the US administration had a national focus, while the dictators of the world could terrorize humanity with less liability. With a long war, perhaps European voters might grow weary of the high energy prices and inflation, and populist politicians might rise to power on an agenda of ending the war with compromise in Putin's favor. And with a long war, Putin could add fuel to the fire of armed conflicts around the world. For instance, more than once we've seen groups like Hamas showing up in Moscow to talk to Putin's officials. And as we've seen in the recent days in Israel, terror groups can give the US and the EU a lot more to worry about and give Ukraine less attention from its allies. So while Putin started out falsely believing he could overrun Ukraine in a blitzkrieg, he now knows the long game is his only chance, and this places Putin right here, trying to keep the war going long enough to turn the tide and end this war with Russian victory. Sadly, Ukraine is not only fighting Putin. Internationally, Ukraine is also facing political resistance from Putin's kindred spirits. People like Maxime Bernier from the People's Party of Canada, Jean-Luc Mélenchon from the French party La France Insoumise, Republican Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene in the US, and Sarah Wagenknecht in Germany. These politicians are populists, motivated by the opportunity to attract more voters. And as war is never popular, speaking out against war is sure to grab some attention. This is why they claim, if we just stop supporting Ukraine, somehow, as if by magic, we will all have peace. Obviously, this is not true, and it conveniently ignores the fact that the Ukrainians would keep on fighting. And it also ignores the fact that giving Putin more land has never satisfied his appetite for more. So in summary, it's not that the populists of the world all want Putin to win. They just don't care Ukraine loses. And this places all of them up here, arguing for solutions which they hope will grant Putin a Russian victory in a short war. This brings us to Ukraine's allies, of which there are now 54 countries providing military aid to Ukraine. This includes 31 NATO member states as well as 23 other countries. The most transparent motive among all these allies is found in Poland and in the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. These are countries who have experienced Russian oppression in the years of the USSR. They identify with Ukraine because they too share a border with Russia, and through recent decades they have feared the kind of invasion which has now happened in Ukraine. NATO countries on average spend about 1.8% of their GDP on their military. But these four countries are all above average, with Poland even outperforming the United States. That's how serious they take the threat from Moscow. Having a somewhat similar history to Ukraine, it's no surprise. These countries are all among the top donors, with Lithuania and Estonia being the world's most dedicated supporters of Ukraine, donating just short of 2% of their GDP, many times more than other allies. In summary, these states both have emotional and financial reasons to want a short war. So we will place the Baltic prime ministers, as well as Poland's prime minister, right next to Zelenskyy, sharing his goal of a Ukrainian victory in a short war. We will end this episode by looking at four of the strongest economies in the world: the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and Germany. Historically, these are all countries who have used their military might to change the course of the world, and as they are all on the top 10 list of weapons exporters, they now have the best chance of using their production capacity to decide the outcome of this war. The leaders of these four countries all say we will support Ukraine for as long as it takes. But for some reason, they never say they want Ukraine to win as quickly as possible. And that's a clue there could be more than one motive behind their way of supporting Ukraine. During the Cold War, these four countries were allied against their common enemy, Russia. And in April last year, the US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin revealed a less official motive for the Cold War allies.
We want to see Russia weakened to the degree that it can't do the kinds of things that it has done in invading Ukraine.
I believe him, because to the modern democratic world, there are only two main adversaries, China and Russia, and Ukraine is now in the process of taking down one of them, without the four Cold War allies spilling a single drop of blood. In July, the British Chief of the Defence Staff, Admiral Sir Anthony Radakin, said Russia has lost nearly half of the combat effectiveness of its army. So to the four Cold War allies who want to see Russia weakened, sending weapons to Ukraine has proven to be a great return of investment. Russia has lost countless numbers of tanks, artillery systems, and fighter jets, an arsenal which will take many years to rebuild. And to make matters even worse for Russia, many of their most elite units have suffered so many casualties their capabilities have been degraded, because their experienced soldiers have now been killed in action. In essence, there are two competing motives for the four big allies: Ukraine winning, which potentially could happen in a short war, and Russia being wiped out, which does require a longer war. And the question is, which motive is most important to these allies? That question can be answered by looking at the specific military equipment sent to Ukraine. For instance, Ukraine has long been requesting more tanks, which are absolutely crucial in order to break through the Russian defenses and end this war. So let's compare the tank deliveries from these four allies to the deliveries coming out of Poland. The GDP of Poland is only 3% of the US GDP. But nevertheless, Poland has delivered 270 old Soviet tanks, 60 more modern Polish tanks, and 14 of the modern Leopard 2 tanks, which is made in Germany. That's a total of 344 tanks. So what about the US then? The United States has an economy 32 times larger than Poland's economy. The US arsenal consists of 8,100 Abrams tanks, but they have only delivered 31. Let us also look at Germany. Germany has delivered 20 of their older Leopard 1 tank and 18 modern Leopard 2 tanks. So, more than the US, but still not a lot. Similarly, the United Kingdom has only delivered 14 of their main battle tank, the Challenger 2. In all fairness to the UK, they only have 386 of these tanks, but still, delivering 14 does not look like the UK really wants to end this war as soon as possible. Our final hope in this matter is France, with a GDP 4 times that of Poland. How many of their main battle tank, the Leclerc, have they delivered? Not a single one. The tank deliveries are only one example, but if we take all of the military aid to Ukraine, there's an enormous difference between the top donors delivering close to 2% of their GDP all the way down to the Cold War allies. Looking at this chart, I'm fully convinced Poland is really trying to end this war as soon as possible. But the four Cold War allies, their primary motive is more likely ensuring a long, slow war of attrition that will put an end to the military capacity of Russia. This is why we will place these 4 countries down here, still aiming for a Ukrainian victory, but in a long war. The war in Ukraine began 600 days ago. I think many of us remember that day. One thing I remember was the very important speech held by US President Joe Biden. Biden said, "America stands up to bullies. We stand up for freedom. This is who we are." In the democratic countries, I believe this is who we all are. From Italy down south to Norway up north, from California in the west to Australia in the east, we all have to stop Vladimir Putin, because this is who we are. But now, 600 days later, the bully has not been stopped. We are standing on the sidelines, cheering on Ukraine, who is fighting the much bigger bully, Russia, while important allies drag out the fight by holding back weapons. This week I asked all of you on Mastodon, should we help Ukraine more in order to end the war sooner? And almost all of you said yes. Because this is who we are. The Ukrainians have suffered long enough. So Joe Biden and Macron, Sunak and Schultz, stop saying for as long as it takes, end this war, and the next time you say Slava Ukraini, show the world you mean it.